The title for one of your works was A Rare Titanic Family. It was covering your great uncle Albert Caldwell. It was actually seems like an extremely interesting work, especially since he survived the Titanic and, as you described, lived to tell you about it several times.
Yeah, he was 26 at the time and he lived to be 91. And he died when I was a senior in high school. But I asked him about it every time I saw him from about the time I was in like seventh grade till the time he passed. And so he told me the story over and over again. He was really thrilled I was interested. And that book, of all of them, was the one that I took some anecdotes and some statistics and quotes and all from media history, but that also involved a lot of personal knowledge from him directly. And he was just really a great person in my life. He influenced me to be interested in history and to major in history. And so then when I went to grad school and I discovered that you could concentrate in media history, well, I was there.
That's very interesting. And when you were in grad school, if I'm not mistaken, at the University of Alabama, did you also have a chance to, I guess, focus in more on media history as it related to the Titanic?
I focused on media history in general. I did write a paper about the media coverage of the Titanic, essentially how two different newspapers in the same city covered it. And I did that for three pairs of cities, and they were so vastly different. If you were reading in one city, Allentown, Pennsylvania, you would find that one newspaper blamed the Titanic on what we saw in the Titanic the movie. If you're old enough to remember that now, anyway, people rushing, the officials rushing to beat a record to get across the ocean, and damn the icebergs we're going through. Or the other paper in town called it a big old case of drunk driving. The captain was carousing, he was at a party, he was drunk, and he ran into an iceberg. Now, we don't hear that anymore. And it's interesting that all three pairs had vastly different interpretations of what happened. And of course, the truth is, you can tell by that, and we'll never know exactly what happened because so many of the key players went down with the ship. But that was a really interesting revelation that, to me, if you were reading a newspaper in one town and your neighbor was reading another one, you got a completely different idea of what went on.
That is really interesting, and essentially considering the fact that you wrote a book on this specific event, A Rare Titanic Family, especially because your great uncle, Albert Caldwell, was actually in the Titanic when it crashed. What was his interpretation of the story?
Oh my goodness. Well, he and his wife had been missionaries in Siam, we would say Thailand today, and they had a baby while they're over there. And he always said that the climate did not agree with her health, so they decided to come home essentially early from their missionary duties, and they were not seeking the Titanic out for reasons of it being unsinkable or anything like that. She was very seasick on their way home, and when they saw an ad for the largest ship in the world, which was the Titanic, they were elated because the larger the ship, the less seasick. So they were determined to take that ship, and they nearly didn't get a ticket because by the time they got to London and sought a ticket, it was sold out in second class, which is the class they could afford and that their church was paying for. And but the man saw how disappointed my uncle was and said, "Oh, sir, every day there's a cancellation. If you come in tomorrow, you can take the first cancellation that comes in." So he did go in the next day, and nervous and sweating, and waited half a day before he got a canceled ticket. Now, they thought they were very, very lucky to be going on this ship, but at this point, they had no sense that it was unsinkable, air quotes there. They figured that out when they were on the boat train to the Titanic, where everybody was talking about how lucky they all were to have obtained a ticket on the world's largest, newest, and most luxurious ocean liner, and unsinkable. Now, Sylvia, my great uncle's wife at the time, was really skeptical about the unsinkable thing. In fact, she was so skeptical that she asked the deckhand who was carrying their luggage to their cabin. She said, "Is this ship really unsinkable?" And he answered with the most famous line ever spoken about the Titanic, and probably all of your listeners know it. I'll give them a minute to think about it. Can you guess it, Garrett? Do you know it? He said...
I don't think I can, but I'm going to go ahead and let you do it.
He said, "Yes, lady, God himself cannot sink this ship." Now, everybody who's writing a fictitious account of the Titanic has to use that line. They love it. But we know it through history, through my great uncle's wife, which I think is kind of special. But they, were just anxious to get home and were not taking it for any other reason. But, it was the lap of luxury, as it turned out, because, the tables were piled high with all the luxuries and delicacies one could ever want. And they noted, and my uncle noted, that his wife could eat them all. And she had been very seasick before, but the Titanic was so big and so stable that she was not seasick. So that was a big bonus. It was the first time they had set out around the Pacific, so they were actually making a circumnavigation of the world. It was the first time she'd been at sea that she wasn't seasick. So that was a real bonus, except for running to the iceberg, which was not. But when they did run into the iceberg, they were roused out of bed by someone coming through, and they were, kind of upset, mainly because they had a 10-month-old baby who had been real fussy all day, and he was asleep. Who wants to wake a baby up at midnight? But they finally got him up, took him out on the deck, and they were sure that there'd be no problem. But my great uncle had a camera. He was one of the first tourists with cameras, and he'd gone around taking pictures on the ship, and he'd gone down into the stokehold where the stokers were shoveling coal into the furnace. That made the ship go, made the steam. And he had asked if he wanted a selfie. This was 1912, but they still wanted a selfie. So he asked if they would take his picture with his camera. And so one of them gave him his shovel and told him how to hold it. And he took his picture on my uncle's camera, which they exchanged names during this. Hi, I'm Albert Caldwell, and whoever the stoker's name was. So anyway, so they were on the night of the sinking. They were milling around waiting for the all clear to go back in their cabin because everybody knew there was no trouble. He said the deck wasn't slanting. Nobody was worried. He kept looking at the eyes of the crew for signs of panic. There wasn't any. And but just then, a whole bunch of stokers came up from below, and one of them recognized him from the day of that photograph, and he called him by name. He said, "Mr. Caldwell," and locked eyes with him. He said, "If you value your life, get off this ship. I've been below, and the hold is filling up with water, and this ship will go down." And that was the first inkling they had that there was really any danger. And momentarily, he argued with the stoker. He said, "I thought this ship was unsinkable." And another stoker said, "Hey, why don't you get off now? And if the big ship is still here in the morning, you could get back on." And suddenly it came crystal clear to him that that was the right answer. And later he attributed that to the fact that his father was a minister back in Illinois. In fact, that's where they were going, was to his father's house. And the father, as it turned out, went to bed every night at 9:30. And that particular night, he had gotten down on his knees and prayed for the safe return of his young family from their missionary jaunt in Siam. And it turned out that 9:30 Illinois time was about 1:30 a.m. ship's time when Uncle Al felt like he saw the light to get off the ship. So he always credited his father's prayers with getting him off the ship, which I always thought was very sweet and to me a dear part of the story.